Chapter 10 Nothing Changes, Part 2. Hey, Willow! The plant track witch spun around, her books clutched to her chest, and looked at the two approaching girls in surprise. Hi? Willow lifted an eyebrow and eyed Scara skeptically. She was tense, as she usually was around Basha and her clique, but she fought down her first instinct to flee in favor of just the slightest bit of curiosity about what was going on. Ever since their grudge rematch, Hexide's resident mean girls had been treating Willow differently. They certainly weren't associating with her, but they weren't tormenting her like they used to either. On a few occasions, Willow could have sworn she caught one of them looking at her with a weird sense of respect. The obvious expectation being Basha, who Willow was pretty sure hated her guts even more now, if that was even possible, but who had so far been unwilling to act on it as much without her friends backing her up. Luz's plan hadn't worked the way it was meant to. But, ironically, it still kind of had. Titan, I really miss her. For the most part, Basha's posse just left Willow alone now. Which made it even weirder that Scar and Amelia now wanted to talk to her all of a sudden. We need your help. Willow blinked. She must have misheard. You need my what? The irritation in her voice was hard to miss. Whatever this was about, Willow didn't trust it. Despite them treating her slightly better lately, there's a huge gulf between actively bullying someone and considering them worthy enough to ask them for help with anything. More likely, the effects of the grudge rematch had finally worn off and the girls now had some elaborate plan to mess with her for fun. But, against her better judgment, Willow stayed. If they were really planning to mess with her again, she wasn't going to run away this time. And she supposed that on the very slim chance that their request was genuine, she might as well hear them out. Willow set her books down on the floor. She preferred to have her hands empty in case she needed to work some quick magic with the flower seeds she was carrying around for her afternoon classes. We're in a bit of a situation right now. Amelia gestured towards Basha, who was standing a bit away from them, but still in hearing distance, and looked like she was about to light someone on fire. Willow grew even more tense, so much so that for a moment, she didn't even notice the cast on the other girl's arm. And then she did. Oh, ouch. She cocked her head, still extremely confused. But what does it have to do with me? You see, the way Scar was speaking seemed almost awkward, which was weird considering how bold and confident she usually seemed. As it is, Basha won't be able to play for at least the next game, maybe longer, which really sucks because Kat is dealing with some personal stuff right now, and Grudgeby is the absolute last thing on her mind, which means we're down a player and don't have a replacement. So, we were wondering if you'd, Amelia rubbed the back of her neck sheepishly. If you'd be willing to, fill in for her for a bit? Willow's eyes widened. You want me to replace Basha on the Grudgeby team? Willow repeated. She couldn't believe what she'd just heard. Me? That explained why Basha looked about ready to murder someone at least. Well, yeah. Kat asked you to join our team after our match for a reason. You were really good. Willow pinched herself slightly. The fact that Scara, of all people, was complimenting her and actually seemed to mean it was completely insane. She didn't wake up. Not a dream then. Willow remained wary. I don't know. Even if those two looked genuine, that wasn't a guarantee they actually meant it. And even if they did, she'd still have to hang out around Basha, which wasn't a very comforting thought. If you don't want to, we totally understand, Amelia said. It would be amazing if you'd be willing, but I know we're not friends or whatever, and we haven't exactly been very nice to you so far. Oh. That was surprisingly thoughtful. I'm not actually considering this, am I? On one hand, Willow knew she didn't owe these girls anything. They'd been making her life miserable for most of their shared school careers, after all. On the other hand, this was the first time any of them had actually expressed regret over it. Willow considered herself a pretty good judge of character, and Amelia certainly seemed genuine. If Scar and Amelia actually meant it, maybe she could give them a chance to prove it. And even if they didn't, getting to show off how powerful her magic had become would hopefully be enough to convince them they were better off leaving her alone in the future. And also, Willow glanced over at Basha, who still hadn't stopped glaring at her. If she could pull this off, Willow would get to prove to Basha and her friends that her last Grudge Bee performance hadn't just been a fluke. And also possibly rub it in Basha's face forever that Willow had saved their championship run. That last thought was way more tempting than it probably should have been. Surprisingly, this deal actually had more potential upsides than she'd first assumed. Maybe agreeing to it wasn't a completely terrible idea? Before she could reach a conclusion, her thoughts were interrupted by her best friend yelling her name from across the hallway. Willow! Gus ran up to her, placing himself just a bit in front of her and eyeing Scar and Amelia angrily. Despite the fact that his body language made it obvious he was scared, he spoke up. Leave her alone! Don't you have better things to do than picking on us all day? Go away! The girls didn't appear to be especially threatened, and Gus felt himself shrinking even more under their surprisingly less maculous than confused gazes. But he didn't move. He wouldn't let them hurt Willow again. Willow put her hand on her friend's shoulder. Hey, Gus? It's okay. They're actually not bothering me. For once. She smiled at him. Thanks, though. I appreciate you looking out for me. Always. He stayed at her side, still glaring at the Grudge Bee team suspiciously. Maybe that was what pushed Willow to make her final decision. There were a lot of aspects to this that might have been enough reason for her to agree, but Gus had given her one more. As long as she could think. The two of them had looked out for each other. They'd always had each other's backs, and that was amazing, and she wouldn't trade his support for the world. But it also meant that Gus had taken damage for her quite a few times, and she felt terrible for that. Gus was like the little brother she'd never had, and him getting hurt just because he was friends with her was the last thing she wanted. If the others stopped picking on her for good, Gus wouldn't be caught in the crossfire anymore, and hopefully the same would be true for Luce, once they found a way to get her back. Okay, I'll play replacement for a bit. She raised a finger before any of the others could reply. Under one condition. Not to sound desperate, but I'll literally do anything. Scar begging for help was maybe the weirdest thing that had happened to Willow all year. And after the summer she'd had, that was really saying something. It's not something you can do. She glanced in Basha's direction. Got it. Scar turned to her best friend and shouted across the hallway. Hey Basha, get over here! We need you for this! Basha rolled her eyes and stomped over. Ugh, what do you want? You guys sacrificing your dignity in a sad attempt to woo half of which is embarrassing enough to watch from a distance. Can you, calm down and just listen to Willow for a second? Scar put a hand on Basha's left shoulder, her grip firm, her voice stern to stress that what she was saying wasn't actually a question. Yeah, and don't call her that, Amelia chimed in. What she said, Gus agreed, watching Basha warily, ready to do, well, something, if she tried messing with his friend again. It's fine. This actually makes for a pretty good example. Willow smirked, then glared pointedly at Basha. That right here? That's exactly what I'm not ready to deal with if I'm going to be on the team. Here's my condition, Basha. You're going to treat me with basic decency. No threats. No insults. No snarky comments. No mean nicknames. No mimicking me to make fun of me. And no throwing stuff at me or my friends. If you violate any of these terms even a single time, I'm quitting the team and you can go find a different replacement. Willow crossed her arms, not breaking eye contact with Basha for even a single second. She would show neither doubt nor fear. Basha had caused her enough of that as it was. I'm done letting you trample around on my confidence just because you feel like it. The only reason I'm considering this to begin with is that I'm a nice person, and your friends seem like half-decent people when not under your heel. but I have better things to do than helping out people who will only make me miserable in return. Despite the fact that Willow's heart was racing at the words, telling Basha off was something she wasn't used to, and it was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. Her voice remained steady and firm. She would not be budging on this. Willow was done being the scared little girl that had let Basha walk all over her for years. If she was going to help the others, it would be on her terms. Scar nodded. That seems more than fair to me. She looked at Basha. You can pull yourself together and be nice to Willow for a couple weeks, right? The undertone of the second sentence was anything but friendly, and none of them missed that. Basha kept glaring at Willow, but she didn't say no. Gus raised an eyebrow. Are we sure she knows how to do that? Willow had to bite her lip to keep herself from laughing. Gus's tone wasn't even mean. It sounded like a genuine question, which was even funnier. Skara, of all people, started snickering. Yeah, very funny. Basha growled. If looks could kill, the hallway would have been a bloodbath. As it was, it just served to underline how much work Basha had to do on her attitude. I can be nice, you know. Willow gave her a doubtful look. I'll believe it when I see it, she replied coolly. The screaming bell reminded them they all had a class they needed to get to. Willow picked up her books again. I don't have time today, but meet us on the grocery field half an hour after school tomorrow? Scar suggested quickly as they headed in the direction of the classroom. Willow nodded. I'll be there. Don't be late. Basha gave her a warning glance, and because Willow was feeling bold today, she rolled her eyes in return. Amity was pretty sure she was getting the hang of bus rides, albeit slower than she would have liked. The one back from the cinema had been pretty terrifying, although Luz holding her hand the entire time had helped. But this one wasn't nearly as bad, despite the fact that this bus was pretty crowded, and they were forced to stand and hold onto the support straps rather than sit. Now, Amity was only a little worried every time the bus lurched or made an unexpected noise. The actually upsetting part about having to stand was that, despite desperately wanting to reach for Luz's hand to calm herself down a little, Amity couldn't. She was certain that if she didn't hold onto the straps tightly with both hands, she would fall over and pull Luz down with her, and that was not how she wanted to start their first day of school together. Maybe, one day, she could do that again, when she felt confident enough in her abilities to not land flat on her face in the middle of the bus. Once they got off at their stop, Amity actually got to see Luz's school for the first time. She didn't remember much from the first time she'd been here. Amity had been so distracted thinking about the twins in school back in the bowling aisles that she just followed Camila around like a lost puppy, barely noticing her environment. The school building looked weird. It was pretty small in comparison to the schools in the bowling aisles, had no towers, and it noticeably lacked any watchful eye like the one Hexide had. Wasn't that dangerous? Luz had explained by now that the human realm lacked the monsters Amity was so used to, but the idea of anybody being able to just walk into school without passing the judgment of an all-seeing eye still seemed unsafe to her. And it wasn't just the building that was unusual. Everyone here looked extremely similar. No towering demons or diminutive fairies in the hallways. No person with more or less than 2 eyes or extra limbs. And Amity's hair color stood out in a way it never would have in the bowling aisles, with only 1 or 2 people they passed having an equally colorful one. It would take some time for Amity to get used to all this. And that's your locker. Luz concluded her small tour of the school a little while later. It's right next to mine because the person that had that one apparently graduated last year, which is pretty nice. They'd have all of their classes together, so the chances of them getting separated were pretty slim anyway. But Amity certainly didn't mind being close to Luz. The locker was missing teeth, which maybe shouldn't have surprised Amity any more by now, because things that were supposed to have teeth not having any seemed to be kind of a pattern here. But it still did. Because these were lockers. And what would keep someone from opening them and stealing another person's stuff if the locker didn't bite every person that attempted that? Amity tried tickling it, prompting no effect from the locker, but an adorable snort from Luz that was almost worth embarrassing herself for. You told me how to open these yesterday and I forgot, didn't I? Maybe, Luz chuckled. This was very cute to watch, though. That stopped Amity dead in her tracks. She remained frozen for several seconds as she attempted to recover from Luz just randomly calling her cute. The smirk Luz was giving her to go along with it almost made Amity think she might have meant something by it. Amity covered up her awkwardness with an even more awkward cough and smiled back at Luz, hoping her friend wouldn't notice the flush still lingering in her cheeks. So, how do I actually open this? It has a code lock. You can set it up yourself. Just choose a combination of numbers you remember easily that aren't that easy to guess. Like the day of your birthday or something. Amity cringed at the thought. She had some fond memories of her birthday, but many more she would rather forget. And the last thing she wanted was to look at the date almost every day. Instead, she entered a different combination, almost certain it was just a random number that she'd memorized for no reason, until she looked at all numbers together and realized it was, in fact, the date of Luz's birthday. Whoops. Another blush crept across her cheeks and tightened. At this point, she was pretty sure the next few weeks would be the death of her. Amity considered changing the combination again, but ended up sticking with it. It was about as secure as any other, and there was no way she'd be forgetting that one. She put the books she didn't need into the locker. Her bag's weight reduced drastically afterwards. Now just click your lock shut again, and we're good to go. Got it. It was incredibly cute how enthusiastic Luz was about explaining all these basic aspects of her world. Amity would have felt stupid for lacking so much basic knowledge. But the fact that Luz seemed to not mind, or even enjoy explaining everything to her friend made Amity feel a lot better. We still have some time left before class, right? Luz nodded, since showing her friend around hadn't taken as long as she expected it to. They had some spare time. The first one won't start for another half an hour, but it can't hurt to head to the classroom early. Yeah, sure. Amity gave her crush a shy, nervous smile. I'm really curious what your friends are like. Do you think they'll like me? Luz froze, her heart dropping to her stomach. That sentence, casual and innocent as it was, ripped the girl's heart to shreds with a reminder of everything this world wasn't. And everything Luz wasn't to this world. She never talked to Amity much about home outside of how much she missed her mom. Had she? Amity doesn't know how much of a loser nobody I am here. Luz was sure she talked to Gus and Willow and Ida about not having friends back home, but apparently she completely forgotten to mention it to Amity. A selfish part of her still wanted to keep it to herself, embarrassing as it was. But she couldn't exactly make any non-existent friends appear out of thin air. She bit her lip and gulped, but forced the words out despite the dread she felt. I actually don't have any. Amity stared at her in disbelief. You're joking, right? Luz shook her head. Her eyes sparkled with tears she hadn't cried, and she looked so unbearably ashamed of herself that it made Amity feel sick. That can't be right. Amity couldn't imagine any world where someone as amazing as Luz, someone who lit up every room she walked into and improved every life she touched by just being her incredible self. Someone who had managed to befriend Amity herself, despite her unbearable attitude and the harshness she'd shown Luz at the beginning, would struggle to make friends. It was unthinkable to her. People here don't like me, Luz admitted. The resigned look of defeat on her face nearly broke Amity's heart. Luz had comforted her so much. She had to do something. Amity gently wrapped her arms around her friend, pulling Luz close. Well, then the people here are all freaking idiots. Luz allowed herself a relieved sigh and leaned into the hug. The admission had made her stomach twist into knots, but Amity had reacted with more kindness and sympathy than Luz had dared to hope for. She even managed to hold her tears in check when she let go of Amity. That's a start, Luz thought as she slowly got the books for the next few lessons from her locker, keeping them on her arms because she was too lazy to open her bag to put them inside. Maybe today wouldn't be so bad after all. They hadn't even run to Ben yet. Luz looked up to see a shock of curly black hair at the other end of the hallway and cursed her optimism. Please don't see us, please don't see us, please don't see us, she repeated in a silent prayer. She tried her hardest to blend in with the other students, hiding behind a smaller group in the middle of the hallway. But to no avail. Luz could hear the smirk in his voice as he called out from across the hallway. Well, well, look who it is! Luz felt sick, her remaining lightheartedness disappearing behind the dark, looming clouds that made up her school routine. Her entire body tensed up, shivers running down her spine. She wanted to turn on her heel and run, but she knew that would have only resulted in even more laughter aimed at her. And even if it hadn't, she was like a deer caught in headlights under his gaze. Her body wouldn't budge, no matter how much she tried to force it to. Her tormentor walked up to them, the grin on his face only growing broader with every step. Hi, Ben. Luz stared at the floor as she forced the words out, her voice extremely monotone. For the first time since returning to this realm, Luz found herself wishing Amity hadn't come after her for purely selfish reasons, because the only thing worse than having to deal with her bully was having Amity around to see it. Finally managing to shake the frozen state, Luz attempted to dodge back towards the lockers, but Ben didn't let her get off the hook that easily. He walked straight up to her, then deliberately bumped into her, pushing her right against one of the lockers. She lost her grip on the stack of textbooks, her heart sinking in despair as they spilled to the floor with a painfully attention-drawing clatter. Luz didn't even need to look to know that other students were staring. Watch it, freak! His voice was incredibly hostile, as if it had been her fault rather than a game he'd been playing for years. Luz blurted out a quick apology as she kneeled down to pick up her books again. Her shoulder throbbed a bit, but that wasn't even the worst part. I can't believe Amity just saw that. Luz was absolutely mortified. She slowly started gathering the books she had dropped. Anything to keep herself from looking up and seeing the expression on Amity's face. There was something about the boiling aisles that had given Luz an amount of confidence she never had before. And apparently, she left it there once she stepped through the portal again. Here, Luz wasn't fearless or even brave. Not only couldn't she manage to stand up to Ben or any of his friends that picked on her, she couldn't even bear to see Amity's reaction to her being pushed around like this. Luz could feel the tears building in the corners of her eyes and knew she was seconds away from crying. God, I'm such a coward. Then she felt a comforting hand on her shoulder. Luz, are you okay? Amity had kneeled down next to her and proceeded to gently cover Luz's hands with hers after letting go of her shoulder. Here, let me help you with that. Amity started piling up the books neatly. When Luz looked up at her with blurry vision, she found kind eyes full of nothing but concern looking back at her. Amity's breath caught in her throat when she realized Luz was crying. Amity's first instinct was shoving the book pile aside to give Luz an impromptu hug. Her second instinct, after holding the sobbing Luz and rubbing her back for a couple of seconds, was far less friendly. She could hear Ben laughing from a couple of feet away, and it made her blood boil in an instant. She slowly let go of Luz, hands clenched into fists as she got up. I'm going to end this guy, Amity growled, and the expression on her face was by far the scariest Luz had ever seen on her, including the time she'd had absolutely lost it the day they first met. Amity, wait! But nothing could have held Amity back right now. She was absolutely livid. Hey, you! Ben, who was standing by his locker now, turned around to face her. He was almost a head taller than her. Amity was sure this would-be bully probably thought himself very intimidating. Unfortunately for him, Amity had spent her whole life dealing with people like Basha. It would take a lot more than some gangly jerk who hit his growth spurt early to scare her. And who are you, Little Witch Academia? The guy grinned at her, the glint in his blue eyes taunting her, and apparently felt very smart over the jab at, what exactly even? Her hair? Amity wasn't sure. I can't believe that loser actually has a friend now. This guy was asking to be punched. But despite it being pretty tempting, Amity held back on that, because starting a fistfight on her first day of school probably wasn't the greatest idea. Instead, She crossed her arms and looked him straight in the eyes. First of all, that's a show, not a person. If you're referring to my hair, I'm pretty sure you actually mean Azora, who's from a completely different franchise. Or maybe Diana? But honestly, it's more a compliment than an insult either way. That you obviously don't even know who either of these people are is kind of embarrassing. And just adds to the fact that this is the most pathetic attempt at an insult I've ever heard in my life. The guy looked at her in surprise. Apparently, he wasn't used to being talked back to, and had expected her to be more scared of him after his laughable comment. That someone like him even dared to breathe into Luz's general direction, let alone make fun of her, made Amity boil with rage. You! Amity, who had been waiting for him to try and respond, immediately cut him off, not particularly interested in whatever half-baked insult he had next. What? Was that supposed to intimidate me? That's honestly just sad. She glared at him. Do you pick on others so that people don't see how insecure you are? Big, tall guy doesn't want to feel small, so he makes others even smaller. Does that make you feel better? He planted himself in front of her threateningly, shaking with anger. Listen, I have no idea who you think you are, new girl, but let me explain something to you about how this school works. His tone was dark, but compared to the venom her parents spat her way, it was about as intimidating as a nursery rhyme. If you want to immediately destroy your school life by befriending the little social outcast over there, fine, that's on you. But if you think you could talk to me like that, what's this gonna be? One of those, you have no idea who I am speeches? I frankly couldn't care less. But nobody gets to talk to Luz that way. Amity growled and poked a finger at his chest. He flinched back slightly. She's the most amazing person I have ever met. And you don't even deserve to breathe the same air as her. If you can't see that, you're lost. But if you touch so much as a single hair on Luz's head ever again, you'll regret it bitterly. Got it? What she did next was far from the smartest decision she could have made. But her impulse control was severely weakened by the fact that Luz, kind, sweet, incredible Luz, who had somehow managed to make Amity laugh when she felt unable to remember what happiness even was crying on the floor behind her. By some miracle, she'd ripped the guy to shreds right then and there. But she couldn't keep herself from surreptitiously drawing a tiny blue spell circle behind her with her free hand. Her eyes turned pitch black, and her tongue into that of a snake, and she hissed at him, opening her mouth wide enough for him to see her fangs. The illusion just lasted for a couple of seconds, but that was enough to send this cretin stumbling back in terror, bumping into the locker behind him. What are you? His voice was shaking. If you leave Luz alone, the only thing I'm going to be is the new girl. Amity made a point of showcasing her sharp teeth with a nasty grin. If you don't, I'm gladly going to become your worst nightmare. Stay away from me! He shrieked. The cold metal of the locker suddenly felt like ice against his back. He panicked even more as his eyes darted across the school hallway, desperately searching for a way out. Amity was kind enough to back away just slightly so he could make a run for it, grinning and waving at him tauntingly. Bye, Ben. Pleasure to meet you. Amity thought about tripping him as he rushed past her, just to really send a message. But she decided to hold back on that. For now, at least. If he did bother Luz again, however, Amity couldn't guarantee anything. After watching the would-be bully disappear down the hallway, you never turn your back on someone you had just threatened. That was common sense. Amity was able to turn her full attention back to her friend. Luz was still sitting on the floor. She wasn't crying anymore, just staring, her mouth slightly agape. Luz? Amity kneeled down beside her again. I've never seen him scared of anything, Luz whispered, kind of amazed. How did you do that? Just a little illusion magic, Amity whispered, flashing Luz a grin. She was certain nobody but Ben had seen it, and it wasn't like anyone was going to believe him if he claimed the new girl was a demon. The twins used to do this little trick to startle me when I was little. Where they would pretend they were possessed. Black eyes, snake tongue, stuff like that. Eventually, I taught myself how to use it. And while scaring them back like I wanted to, didn't really work. At least I wasn't scared of it anymore once I mastered it. Luz looked up at her and shook her head. There was a disbelieving smile on her face. That probably wasn't a great idea, but it was very sweet of you. Luz's smile dropped. No one's ever done that for me before. We'll get used to it. I won't let anyone ever hurt you again. Amity smiled at Luz and pulled her into another hug. Is that why you always stand up for everyone else? Because you want to give others something you always longed for? End of chapter.